Do you guys know about what he's up to right now? All right, I'm ready for the right spot. So I feel very grateful. There is the Santa Cruz Challenge. I've said this many times, even the first day that we met here. There are so many powerful people that live in this county. It's incredible. Oh, Ocean is one of them. I know you guys saw his bio online. I don't want to talk a little bit too much because we want to get into the health lecture, the nitty-gritty of this information. But you guys know that food is an important part of our life. And there's a lot of going on, personal, political, a lot of politics around food, GMOs. We're so lucky to be in Santa Cruz with so many organic farms. We have more organic farms in Santa Cruz than anywhere in the world. So, I told you about being a Chinese doctor. I'm a birth school doctor, where you can heal digestion, everything else is healed. It's kind of that idea where, you know, how do you feel when you eat is just life force. So, I won't hammer that down, but I believe in Ocean's work, and I'm really happy to hear what he has to say to you, and I hope you guys have your ears open. So, if you need to pee, I'll pee now. All right. So, please stand up, guys, and welcome.
It's great to be with you. And two people just arrived. My sons, River and Bodhi, are in the back corner. And that just touches me and makes me want to start by just sharing how much it means to me to be doing work in my life that is of benefit to the world they'll grow up in. And to know that even though my work takes me away a lot, because I'm working a lot of hours sometimes, to know that my kids are proud of me and that they're celebrating what we're accomplishing. It means more than I could possibly say. And I come from an interesting family context. My grandfather started Baskin Robbins Ice Cream Company, 31 flavors. And my dad, John Robbins, grew up with an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool in the backyard and with 31 flavors of ice cream in the freezer at all times. And he was groomed from early childhood with the expectation that he would one day join in running the family company. But when he was in his early 20s, he said no. He walked away from huge amounts of fame and fortune and a path that was practically paved with gold as well as ice cream to, as we say, follow his own rocky road. And he and my mom, who is also here with us, Deo, moved to a little island off the coast of Canada where they built a one-room log cabin, grew most of their own food, and lived very, very simply. It was kind of a pendulum swing from a class perspective. And I was born in the middle of the woods to parents who were practicing yoga and meditation for several hours a day and who named their kid Ocean. And then when I got a little older, we moved to California. We moved to Santa Cruz County when I was 10. And my dad began work on a book called Diet for a New America, which came out in 1987. And it inspired millions of people to look at their food choices as an opportunity to make a difference in the world. And the media had a lot of fun with the story. They called him the rebel without a cone. You know, here's this guy, this would-be ice cream mayor, who walks away from this ice cream fortune and ends up becoming a spokesperson for health. And, you know, not that an ice cream cone is going to kill anybody, but the reality is that ice cream is fundamentally a combination of fat and dairy fat and sugar and chemicals. And none of those things are probably at the top of the list of the top things we should be eating if we want to thrive. So his work made a lot of waves. His books have sold several million copies and inspired a lot of people. When I was a teenager, at the age of 16, inspired by my dad's example, I wanted to reach out to my generation, and I ended up founding a nonprofit called Youth for Environmental Sanity, or YES. And we traveled across the United States speaking to school assemblies about the environment and food choices and what youth could do to make a difference in the world. We reached about 650,000 people in schools all across the US. And then we started focusing on leadership gatherings for young activists around the world that we called jams. And we held these all over the planet. And so I spent 20 years directing YES, working with leaders from over 65 countries. And I kept seeing everywhere we went that everybody eats, all over the world, whatever our culture, context, even whatever class is, we all eat. I mean, some people, of course, don't have enough to eat. But if we're going to live, we're going to eat. And I also saw that what we eat has a huge impact on how we live and upon the environments and communities within which we live. And so I ended up deciding, after 20 years working all over the world, that I wanted to decide to focus the next phase of my life directly on food choices. So I joined with my dad 3 years ago in launching the Food Revolution Network, for which I now serve as CEO. And we've grown very rapidly. We have over 150,000 members. And we're standing up for healthy, sustainable, humane, and conscious food for everybody. Now, one of the things that we see in the food world is what I call food 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. So food 1.0 was survival. In food 1.0, if you can get enough calories to fill your belly and carry on for another day, that is success. And for most of humanity, throughout most of human history, that has been where it's been at around food. And for many people in the world today, frankly, that's still what's up. Now, food 2.0 has been about commerce. In food 2.0, we get 500 different kinds of breakfast cereal in supermarket aisles. We get 31 flavors of ice cream. We get access to a phenomenal array of cuisines and flavors and tastes and textures from all over the planet at our disposal, and the consumer who has the money to afford it has incredible power and choice. Now, the dominant paradigm of food 1.0 is about survival. The dominant paradigm of food 2.0 is about commerce. It's fundamentally a transaction. We have turned food into a commodity. Now, it's given us a lot, but some of what it's given us is epidemic rates of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, obesity. It's given us 1 in 3 kids in the United States that's expected to get diabetes in their lifetime. It's given us an out-of-control medical system where we are expected, within a generation, to spend our entire GDP just on the treatment of disease in the United States. We can't afford to do this, but we're sicker and sicker and sicker. So that's what Food 2.0 is, the shadow side of it, which is why I say we need to move to the next level. We need to survive, we need to make money, and have food be affordable and accessible, and we want to thrive and have options, but we also want food to be about health. So I say food 3.0 means the central organizing principle of our food system is health for our bodies and health for our planet. In food 3.0, we restore food not just to being a commodity, but to being a community. It becomes a relationship with our own integrity and values and what we want for our health and our lives, a relationship with farm workers, with families and communities and ecosystems, with animals, a relationship with the world around us. When we bring our food back into alignment with who we are as human beings, with what we care about and what we dream of and what we really want for our lives and for our world, something profound happens. Because what we eat literally becomes us. Every time you eat, you are taking something into your body that becomes the very fabric of who you are. And so when we eat food that's a product of greed and exploitation, that's fundamentally driven by the desire to make money, and that is the bottom line operating goal, that has an effect on who you become, on how you feel, and on what becomes of you. And when you eat food that's prepared with love, with care, with compassion, with integrity, with respect for life and for the people who created that food, that becomes you. And it's a different result. It's a different outcome. So what we're doing in the food revolution is calling for a fundamental transformation in the way we relate to food and the kind of food that we consume and the way it's produced so that we can bring it into integrity with who we are and what we want. And we use the word revolution, and we don't use it flippantly. But in a context where the dominant norm, the status quo, is food that is debilitating to our bodies, that is cruel to animals, that is saturated in pesticides and hormones and antibiotics and genetically modified organisms, and that's full of sugar. The average American eats 150 pounds of sugar per year, added sugar. In that context, eating real, natural, whole, organic, sustainable food is radical. It's revolutionary. And, I'd like to see the time when it's normal. But we got a little ways to go yet, Those of us who are taking responsibility for our health and making a difference with our lives are the weirdos in a lot of cases, right? Well, it's considered perfectly normal to eat food that's a product of a toxic system that's, full of cruelty. And so we've got some work to do. And part of what I love to do is to connect the dots, to show how there's a link between the fact that the average farm worker in America dies by the age of 49, that's the life expectancy for our farm workers, and the fact that they're out there in those fields spraying pesticides all day, or living or working in fields that are saturated in pesticides, and the fact that when we eat the food that's got those pesticides in it, it just might be linked to higher rates of cancer, right? And we see much higher rates of cancer in the farm worker community. So what does that tell us about the possibility that some of that food might actually be hazardous to us? I think there's a link between the way we treat animals. When we have animals in factory farms or concentrated animal feeding operations where they cannot, live in anything like their normal way, then we have a situation where those animals have to be fed antibiotics with every dose of feed just to keep them alive. Well, what happens when 80% of our antibiotics are being fed to livestock instead of humans is that we have factory farms that have become breeding grounds for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. What's that doing? Well, 20,000 Americans died last year from diseases caused by bacteria that would have been prevented just a few years ago with antibiotics that no longer work. With 80% of our antibiotics being used in factory farms, you could say that these entities have become biological weapons factories. They are producing weapons, lethal bacteria that's resistant to our foremost weapons against infectious disease. So what we do when we treat animals with immense cruelty literally comes back to become a public health crisis. When we consume products that are produced in this way, when we consume products that are laced with chemicals, some of which have interactions with each other that we have no way to understand, is it any surprise, really, that so many people are sick today? So what we're about in the food revolution is standing, of course, for systemic change. We want to change policy. But we're also standing for individual empowerment, because you don't have to wait for Monsanto or Coca-Cola or McDonald's or the US government to make changes in your own life and to become liberated from a toxic food culture. And as you do take those steps, you become part of a tidal wave of history that is changing. There is a food movement right now that is exploding. In the last 15 years, we've seen a 4-fold increase nationally in farmers markets, organic food sales, community-supported agriculture. All three of these, 4-fold increase. In the last 3 years, certified non-GMO foods have gone from $0 to $5 billion in sales in 3 years. There's obviously a hunger for foods that are more real and natural that people can trust. So I think it's a very exciting time to be a part of this movement, to be taking a stand. And the doors are opening, and the marketplace is driving a lot of change, which I think is one of the really potent things we're seeing. Even companies like McDonald's, their sales have been tanking. They've had 4 straight losing quarters. And they just announced that they're going to explore putting organic food in their restaurants. Now, I'm still not going to eat there. But we are seeing some change. Coca-Cola is, not my favorite company. However, let's just tell you a little story here. So they've been spending a lot of money fighting GMO labeling, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about GMOs tonight because it's one of the things I'm passionate about. They've been spending millions of dollars fighting GMO labeling. They've also been watching their sales of carbonated sugar water go down year after year. And so they've been buying up more and more of the natural brands. They bought Adwala, they bought Zico coconut water, they bought Honest Tea, among others. So they're trying to be able to profit from companies or brands that are more natural. And those brands are where their profit center is right now. So those are the things that are growing in the company, while Coca-Cola sales are dropping. So I was, a few years ago, I was in the store with my son River back here and Bodie, and it was hot. I was actually at Staff of Life. It was hot, and I was kind of tired, and I reached for an Adwala. And River says, "What are you doing?" He said, "You're giving your money to Coke." And I was like, "Well, I'm hot and tired. Can I have this thing?" And he's like, "Do you want to support Coke they fight GMO labeling. I was like, okay, I put it back. I didn't buy that Odwalla. Then, about a year ago, there was a GMO labeling initiative in the state of Washington that narrowly lost. And Coca-Cola had put over $1 million into fighting it. And we were trying to think, what can we do to hold some of these companies accountable? Because, we realized that ultimately our politicians are bought off by the corporations and the donors that fund them. They're much more accountable to their donors than to the voters. And those donations are coming from somewhere, right? And so maybe we have more power as a democracy in some ways by standing with the power of the consumer, because these companies need our dollars to be able to, keep their profits up. And so I was trying to think what we could do, and we realized we should focus on the natural brands that are owned by these big corporations. And we decided after extensive research to focus on Coca-Cola with a highlight of Odwalla and Honest Tea for boycott. So we wrote the company very nicely and respectfully and explained to them why we thought that fighting GMO labeling, fighting consumer empowerment, fighting transparency was out of keeping with their stated corporate values, and why we were going to be calling for this boycott. And we ended up getting over 300,000 people joining on the campaign all over the world. And we took that to Coca-Cola, and we told them that we'd like to meet with them to represent the views of our constituents. Shockingly, they said yes. So we went and met with some of their people, and I can't go into a lot of confidential information, but I will say that we're in ongoing dialogue, and they are tired of spending millions of dollars in state after state being on what they feel looks like the wrong side of history. They feel like they don't want state-by-state patchwork quilt of GMO labeling laws, and that's what they're afraid of. But they are recognizing that it may come to pass that there needs to be a federal mandatory GMO policy. Now, they haven't stated that as an official policy, but there is some movement, and we're in conversation about what it would look like to make that into a reality. So my son River ultimately tipped me off to kind of breakthrough campaign. Thank you, River, for that. And while I'm on the subject of my kids, I want to tell you another story, because another proud papa moment. So River and Bodhi went to summer camp this last summer, and it was their first time being at summer camp, and they were gone for a week. And when they got home, I was asking, how was camp? And they were exposed to a lot of new kinds of cultures and experiences. That they're homeschoolers, so they're not used to being around a lot of the mainstream stuff that they were exposed to, and including the food. And so I asked them how was camp, and they said camp was great. And then Bodhi said, it was really, really fun. The only trouble was the food. And then I had this moment of like, oh no, did he feel alienated and isolated? And now he wants to eat Twinkies. And he's like, yeah, there weren't enough vegetables. And then he said, in fact, I miss vegetables. Could we have a big pot of vegetables tonight? And I was proud of him for three things. I was proud of him because he had fun at camp, even though he was with people who didn't eat the way he was used to. I was proud of him because he missed vegetables. And I was proud of him because he took action on that and wanted to eat vegetables. I think we could all learn a lot from Bodhi. And when people tell me, oh, kids, they just want to eat junk, I'm like, well, not my kids. It's possible, right? It's possible that when we stand for our values and we share why, that children can join us in understanding that and standing for their own health. Now, that's not to say it's predictable. I know every child has their own journey, right? But a lot of times people ask me, how do you deal with family dynamics? Here we are heading towards the holidays right now, and a lot of times families will be coming together, and not everyone eats the same way, and we all have our conflicts about food, and in some cases those can be quite contentious. And what I'll say is that we tend to bring to our differences around food what we bring to our differences around everything else. When there is love in a family system, you find a loving way of working with those differences. When there's toxicity and judgment and criticism and resentment, then that's going to come up in any difference that you discuss. And if you just try to stay in the safe zones and not discuss any differences ever, then your love gets smaller and smaller. And so when we can have space within any healthy family organism for differences and diversity of perspectives and views, then we can create more aliveness and authenticity and connection. And so I think one of the goals in coming together with family over the holidays or any other time when you discuss differences is how can you be in your truth and be in your integrity and stand for what you want and what's good for your body and health, and also love and respect other people in your life and their own journey. Right? Because not everyone, there is no one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter way to be or eat or live or think or practice anything. We all have our own unique biochemical individuality, our own ecosystems, our own sensibilities and sense of ethics, our own values, our own needs, our own physical history, our own way that we process nutrients. So everyone has unique needs. Everyone has unique desires and ways of relating to those desires. And I think what's exciting about the potential of family gatherings is the opportunity to be who we are and love other people. And then sometimes you'll be around folks who maybe don't know some things you know, right? And sometimes they may be acting from that not knowing stuff in ways that you know could be harming them, could cause them suffering, and maybe you're even afraid of how you're going to have to take care of them later in life if they keep going on this course, right? So it becomes very selfish. And so in that context then, how do you navigate those situations, right? Now, everyone, of course, has their own relationships and context. I will only say that for me, I work with the Serenity Prayer, which has been popularized in Alcoholics Anonymous, which has helped me to have the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this is true in life and with other people, spouses and family and friends and children, and also with ourselves, right? There are some things where we need the serenity to accept them. There are some things where we need the courage to change them. And there are some places where we really do need the wisdom to know the difference. And that dance of will, surrender, and wisdom, to me, is one of the sacred, profound realities of life. You know, you can bring that into almost any area and find depth and substance there. So, I want to talk a little bit about a few of the food politics issues that really drive me, and one of those is GMOs. I've referenced them a few times. Now, what's a GMO? Some people think it means God move over. But no, it means genetically modified organisms. And we, as many of you may know, about 75% of the foods on our supermarket shelves and restaurant menus contain GMOs at this point. They're pretty much all coming from 4 crops, 99% corn, soy, canola, which is, a rapeseed, which is in canola oil, and sugar beets. Half of our sugar is coming from sugar beets, and 99% of those are genetically engineered. So, so those 4 crops are the vast majority. There's also some cottonseed oil, because cotton is mostly GMO at this point in this country. And yet those crops are used very widely, and byproducts from them are in so many different foods. Now, the biotech industry, chiefly Monsanto, has promised us that GMOs would provide some really wonderful things, that they would provide higher yields, more drought-resistant crops, that they would give us lower pesticide use, and better nutritional value and better flavor. So far, 20-plus years into the GMO experiment, with the quantities of farmland that we have now being genetically modified, we have not gotten any of those things. Studies show us that genetically modified crops do not produce higher yields. They are not using less water. They are leading to more pesticide consumption. They have not brought us any flavor improvement, and they have not brought us any nutritional value. What they have given us is generally 2 things, one or the other or both. Number 1 is herbicide resistance. So this means that farmers can spray herbicides over a field and it will kill weeds and the plant will stay standing. The main herbicide in question here is Roundup, made by Monsanto. Now, what's happened is that we have massive quantities of these herbicides being sprayed on our fields, and they're now getting into our bodies because we're eating plants that were sprayed with them, which never before happened in history. And with this massive quantities of glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, it's now making its way into our waters, It's in the umbilical cord blood attached to newborns. It's in the tissues of every human being on Earth. Now we have superweeds that are resistant to glyphosate. And they are able to withstand it. So now we've got a new generation in a chemical arms race of 2,4-D resistant crops that have just been approved. 2,4-D is one of the active ingredients in a substance known as Agent Orange. Used as a chemical warfare agent during the Vietnam War, it's been linked to more than 1 million birth defects. It is known to increase risk of cancer. We're now going to be spraying a chemical warfare agent on our farmlands, on foods destined for human consumption. So that's one of the traits. The other trait is plants that produce their own insecticides in every cell of the plant. Bt is mainly what's used here. Now, Bt has been used in organic agriculture for a long time, and it's generally considered non-toxic to humans. However, I don't know anyone who wants to drink it. We're now eating it. This is not something you can wash off. It's in every cell of the plant. These plants are literally registered with the EPA as pesticides. So when you eat Bt corn, or high fructose corn syrup, which is coming from this place, it's got the Bt toxin in it. What does this do to us? Of course, Monsanto will tell us it's completely non-toxic. They'd probably tell you it's a multivitamin. But there are some very credible scientists who are concerned that glyphosate and Bt may not be as non-toxic as we've been led to believe, and that there could be a connection between the 5-fold increase in food allergy rates and hospitalizations in the last generation and the spread of GMO crops. That there could be the possibility that these substances could be impacting the flora of our bacterial milieu in our stomachs and upsetting our digestive tracts. Now, I don't know how many of you know people that are allergic to things that they didn't used to be, but I'm seeing it all over the place. Now, correlation is not causation. We do not know for a fact that these things are linked. But when you have a correlation this strong, it's worth asking more. It's worth studying more. And when Consumers Union analyzed the data, they said, well, every study that's ever been done by people who were paid by the biotech industry has found that GMOs were completely safe. If we don't count those studies, and we just look at the other ones, we don't have a whole lot to go on. But what we do find is that about maybe a quarter of them have found major problems. And that's not enough to be certain, but it's enough to probe deeper. And when you hear scientists saying, or rather industry representatives saying that GMOs have been found to be completely safe and they're completely deeply studied, I'm just giving you a little glimpse on what Consumers Union decided, when their analysis was actually going on here. They're very clear that we need a lot more study and a lot more research, that the jury is very much still out on this. And there is a pattern of actually when scientists conduct studies that are not to the industry's liking, they lose their jobs, they lose their funding, they are discredited widely. And this has happened so many times that it makes it very difficult for impartial research to even go forward. So this is one of the reasons why we're standing for GMO labeling. On the one hand, it's just a label. How much does it matter? And I don't know how much consumers would change their choices. But I think given this reality, we should have a right to know, so that if we're going to be guinea pigs in this massive experiment, we should at least be knowing guinea pigs who have a sense of choice in the matter. And the reality is, and the reason the industry is fighting so hard on this in state after state, the reality is that they do not want to see labeling because they think that if we had labeling, it would impact consumer choice. And if it impacted consumer choice, then it would ultimately have to impact agricultural policy. And Monsanto does not want to see that happen, right? Because they're afraid of what we would do if we had that knowledge. So I think it's a tipping point. This is why in Oregon, yet again, we just saw the highest spending, shattered state records for any ballot initiative in state history. And we'll know more in the next day or two. That is right now down to about 5,000 votes differential The no side, is ahead by about 5,000 votes. But of the uncounted votes right now, we're going to narrow that gap. And we may even catch up. There's a lot of, there's 13,000 contested ballots from people who didn't sign their thing properly. And about 9,000 of those are probably yeses. So if we can get those people to get their ballots corrected in the next 2 days, we may just win in Oregon. I don't know if we'll win in Oregon, but I do know that we're going to win because 93% of the American public wants to know if their food's genetically engineered and supports labeling. And the industry cannot continue to fight. The food industry is going to get sick and tired of spending millions and millions and millions of dollars, $100 million in the last couple of years, by the way, fighting these ballot initiatives. And eventually, I think we're going to get this. Another place of hope for me in the policy arena is around factory farms. We have these abominable conditions for animals. Most people, you don't have to be a vegetarian or an animal lover to be appalled when you see, mother pigs in these gestational crates where they are not allowed to even stand up. They are in a laying down position and they cannot move for months. And their babies nurse through these metal slats and they can't even get to their babies to lick them. To find that appalling. These things have been banned now in 10 states in the US. They've been banned throughout the entire European Union. And anybody of conscience who looks at that says, no, I don't want to be a part of a system like that. And we have got, cage-free is becoming the law in California for eggs. Now, unfortunately, in some cases, that means you might have 5,000 or 10,000 birds in a massive warehouse, and they still only have 1 cubic foot per bird, and they can barely lift a wing. But there's movement happening, right? There is movement happening. The point is that people don't want to see our animals treated like machines. They want to see them treated like sentient beings. And the reality is that there are certain of the most abominable practices that you cannot carry out without drugs that are given to those animals. And so as we start to make changes, we realize that the more humane systems often lead to a more humane product for our bodies as well, right? So I have a lot of hope that when empowered with knowledge about what's really going on, most people, most of the time, want to take steps in the right direction. And as much money is being made off of feeding us junk, more and more people are getting informed, are getting empowered, and are realizing the toxic status quo just is not good enough. We can do so much better. And because we can do better, I think we must do better. And more people are doing better. So one of the things I stand for, we stand for real food, instead more food that comes from plants and less that is made in plants. We stand for food that's actually coming from the earth and that's not the product of a bunch of chemicals and factories. We stand for natural food, similar kind of concept, right? Even though the word natural has been bandied about, there's no regulation on it, so you see it on all kinds of packages and it actually means absolutely nothing. But functionally, connected to nature, I think means quite a bit. We stand for organic food, because it can have higher nutrient value, it can be higher in antioxidants. The actual process of fighting off bugs builds in plants more antioxidants, which actually turn out to help fight cancer, right? So organic foods are found to have 25% or more on average more antioxidants. Organic foods also, of course, have less pesticides, right? And they're produced in ways that are more sustainable, long-term, that are less based on petroleum and more based on sustainable agricultural practices that put more minerals in the soil and lead to stronger, healthier topsoil. They're more drought resistant. They're more flood resistant. They're generally just more hardy. And organic agriculture is a major step forward, I think, for where we need to go. We also stand for more plant-strong food. Now here's the deal on this. We eat a lot of meat in the United States today. And it's mostly coming from factory farms. If we move towards more grass-fed, pasture-raised, naturally produced animal products, it's going to take a lot of land to produce the kind of quantities of meat that we're consuming right now. In fact, it takes more land to produce pasture-raised beef than it does to produce factory farm feedlot beef, right? And it actually leads to more carbon impact because that land could have been forest, and because those cows are producing methane their entire lives, and their lives are about twice as long when it takes them longer to reach maturity before they're killed, right? So in fact, studies are showing that when you look at the climate impact of our food choices, and cows may impact our climate more than cars, that pasture-raised isn't so great. Now, it's a lot better in a lot of other ways, but I'm just saying in terms of quantity, if we're going to consume a massive quantity of animal products, we're going to not be able to do that for the large human population that we have and do it in a humane and sustainable kind of a way based on anything that I'm aware of right now for producing it. So we're calling for more plant strong, which basically means eating more plants. And there's a lot of benefits to that. The number one nutrient that I think that most people are deficient in the American diet is fiber. We get on average, about half of what we should for fiber. In fact, less than 5% of the US population gets the recommended daily allowance for fiber. And fiber is essential to digestion and even nutrient absorption when your colon is moving things through properly. And lack of fiber obviously can lead to constipation. It can lead to a lot of other problems as well long term, including colon cancer. And so a high fiber diet is important, and there is no fiber in animal products. So there again, eating more plants, there's also no fiber in sugar, and there's virtually no fiber in white flour, and there's no fiber in oils. So there again, eating a natural, whole foods, plant-strong diet comes out to be really beneficial for us, right? So we're standing for plant-strong, organic, non-GMO, natural, real foods, and I also want to add fair trade to the mix. So, and we use the term fair trade thinking about international policy, but I think it also shows up domestically. Right here in Santa Cruz County, we have farm workers who are slaving away for like 12 hours a day, who don't have health insurance, with a life expectancy at 49 years. And I don't want, if I can possibly help it, to be participating in that system. I want the people that grow the food that I eat to have a life, to be treated like sentient people, to live with some level of dignity. Now, I understand there's a lot of despair and desperation, and that's why people are willing to take those jobs. But I still want people to be treated with dignity. And so, to me, fair trade and fair working conditions is part of the values that I hold. And there, too, we find that, in general, small-scale, organic-type farms tend to treat people better, than the massive, systematic, corporate agribusiness systems do. There's more relationship between the farm owner and the people in the fields. So, these are some of the things that I believe in. If you can't tell, I'm kind of passionate about it. And I am passionate about what it can do for us. What it can do for us to restore community and integrity and authenticity to our relationship with food, so that what we take into our bodies is an expression of our conscience, of our values, of our love. So that when we eat, we aren't just shoveling it in. We are saying to our bodies, I love you. We are saying to our hearts, I care about you. We aren't treating ourselves like a commodity. It's not just dollars out and calories in, dollars out and short-term flavor in. It's actually an act of love, an act of connection, an act of reverence for who we are and what we dream of and what we're committed to and what we love. And when we step into that relationship with food, I think our hearts become more full. I think our bodies become more healthy. I think our minds even become more clear. We're heading towards Thanksgiving right now. And I think it's a good time to reflect on the power of giving thanks. There have been a lot of studies done on the neuroscience of gratitude. And it turns out that gratefulness doesn't just make things feel better. It actually makes them get better. People who wrote down at the end of the day 3 things they were grateful for every day for a couple of weeks had their biomarkers improve. Their cholesterol levels, that were going down. Their blood pressure levels were going down. Taken out over a longer term period of time, people's marriages were more likely to survive. They were less likely to be on antidepressants. Just 3 things a day, 5 minutes or less, had a dramatic impact over the course of people's lives. So I truly believe that what we appreciate appreciates. That when we feel our gratitude, it can actually help us to be more available, to receive more, to love more, to enjoy more. And in relationship to food particularly, gratitude can help our cells to be ready to receive the nourishment we're taking in. Now, most of us eat a decent number of our meals in the car and a decent number of our meals at our desks, and I'm totally included in that. Even then, can we bring some sense of love, reverence, gratitude, respect for who we are, and gratitude for whoever brought this food into our lives, into that relationship? I think when we do, we become richer, more whole, more vibrant human beings. So I want to hear if you have any questions. Yeah. Yeah.
What about when there's a farm next to a farm? One GMO is non-GMO farm, and the other one is a GMO farm. Can that really be true because they're so close to each other?
Well, it depends what they're growing. But if you've got like corn, for example, then you've got pollen from the corn that's going to drift. And there is actually no truly non-GMO corn left on Earth, like 100% pure, because corn drifts far. And this is why the nation of Mexico has banned GMO corn from being grown in Mexico, because corn is sacred in Mexico to a lot of indigenous peoples there. And the nation realized that their corn would all be contaminated. And they have all these different varieties and colors, and it would all be contaminated if they allowed this in. So it may not be banned forever, but there is an indefinite moratorium on growing of GMO corn in Mexico. It is a real concern. At this point, it's all about degree, because it's very difficult to have totally pure anything. And that's true about living in the world, right? I mean, we are all part of a world where the air we're breathing right now contains particulates of some stuff we probably don't want to be breathing, right? But it's part of it. So the toxicity of this world is part of the dynamic that we work with, and we do the best we can to be as healthy as we can. But I think it's about progress, not perfection, in so many areas. So when it comes to agricultural policy, you could have a major case that Monsanto and these other companies are polluting organic agriculture and rendering it potentially ineffective. There are a lot of people that are very concerned that within a generation, if we don't find some real ways of containing GMO agriculture, it may be too late. The spread will be so ubiquitous that organically grown crops may not qualify for non-GMO certification, right? And so we're not there yet, but absolutely, if you're right next to a farm that's growing GMO corn and you're growing organic corn, you've got a problem, But if you're 10 miles away, maybe not as big a problem. Ironically, Monsanto has actually been on the offensive with this. They have a whole team of hundreds of people that find farmers, they call it patent infringement. They think their stuff is so much better. So if somebody's growing their crops without licensing it and buying it from them, then they get very upset, right? And they sue those folks. And one farmer, Percy Schmeitzer, was actually wanting to grow non-GMO canola. His crops got contaminated. They sued him for using their stuff without paying for it. He ended up prevailing in that case. But I don't know why on earth we have a legal system that didn't tilt it the other direction. Yeah?
Are these farms identified as GMO or non-GMO? Is that public record?
No, it's not. or tracked in some way. Although in Hawaii, there's efforts to identify and to create buffer zones, so like no GMO farms can be within a certain distance of schools, and there's some efforts. Maui just banned GMO agriculture, period. They are actually where Monsanto and Dow are growing a lot of their seeds that they sell to farms all over the world on Maui. So they spent $8 million trying to fight that. They spent $365 per vote they got in Maui, and they still lost. Now they're fighting it in the courts. But there's clearly a lot of people that are concerned about this. Hawaii, the Big Island, also passed it, and Kauai. They've all passed non-GMO legislation, and they're all in the courts with it. Yeah.
I was reading this morning about the state of Vermont, and Vermont is not being sued by
Right.
Monsanto because Vermont passed a labeling out there.
Yeah.
And Starbucks is cooperating with Monsanto and partnering up. So, there's Neil Young actually out there recommending a boycott.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a way of finding out other companies that are guilty of these kind of crimes that we can
Oh, yeah.
a good list of companies?
Sure. Absolutely.
That's the one really effective way. I mean, because of powerlessness, that's the one effective way that you can make a difference.
Well, so you can say, I'm not going to support any company that's involved in fighting GMO labeling, and you're going to find that you have a very limited options. Because 80% of the natural foods industry is owned by big corporate America, right? And most of those companies are involved in fighting GMO labeling when you get down to it. So you can also choose to focus on the particular companies that are being highlighted by organizations that are calling for it, because we ultimately, if we can move one company like Starbucks or Coca-Cola, their buddies are going to go along, right? So sometimes there's a power in a lot of people focusing around a particular issue. And so, right now, I mean, there are active boycotts about just about everybody if you look far enough, but definitely Pepsi, Coca-Cola. So Pepsi owns Naked Juice, by the way. Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and Starbucks are three of the main ones that are getting a lot of attention, but also Kellogg's is getting a lot of attention, and so is General Mills. Because these are the ones that have, out of all the companies in America, they have stepped out to really lead the charge against GMO labeling. Organic Consumers Association puts out, you can easily Google this or go to their website, organicconsumers.org. They put out directories looking at what they call the trader brands. They're focusing on who are the natural foods brands that are owned by companies that are fighting GMO labeling. And they're calling for a boycott of all of them. You can go there for sure. Though some of them make some good products. So it is definitely a question. I don't have a hard time boycotting Coke or Pepsi. Boycotting honesty is a little harder, but I can do that. But some of these things get challenging when they are like part of your staples and they're one of the healthy things you like to eat. But obviously there are alternatives in almost every case, and so it's a really powerful opportunity to look at how you can buy more local, independently owned products. You guys heading off? All right, thanks for coming. Yeah.
So since you travel a lot, I find just being busy and when I
Yeah.
travel, it seems impossible to make the kind of places that you want. So I'm just wondering what you do when you're
Traveling? Yeah. Well, so number one tip is plan ahead. And to the extent that you can bring food with you. You can know, I Google in advance, what's my itinerary and where are there natural food stores that I can stop at along the way. Obviously not being able to take certain foods carry-on makes taking food on a plane difficult. But that doesn't mean that when I get off a plane, my first stop is generally going to be a natural food store. Because I know that, it's like if I'm going into space, I've got to have my oxygen tank, Like, honestly, in a toxic food culture, you've got to be prepared and you've got to plan ahead because you can't just run out and have to get stuff at any fast food or convenience store because our fast food and our convenient food happens to be toxic food, right? So we've got to plan ahead. And then if you're visiting people, visiting friends, let them know whatever needs you might have. There's nothing worse than like someone spending hours making a meal for you and then finding out that you don't eat what they made, right? I mean, nobody likes that. So be willing to tell them first, here's my limitations, whatever they might be, or here's my needs. I'm not assuming you're going to cook anything for me, but if you do, So these kinds of things can be helpful. And then as well, I do have different standards when I'm on the road than when I'm at home. I mean, I just do, So I'm pretty passionate about my values around most of what I eat, but I also live in the real world, and I think it's better for me to eat food than to go hungry, even if the food is not up to all my perfect standards. So, I'm not 100% non-GMO. Honestly, I don't think hardly anybody is. If you eat at any restaurants, you're probably not 100% non-GMO. I mean, Chipotle's is going non-GMO. They're not even there yet. But they have a very simple menu. Most restaurants are using soybean oil, corn oil, various additives, sugar. They're not thinking about that. So you do the best you can. Yeah.
Wondering about the collapse
Mm-hmm.
because you haven't mentioned any of that. Do you
Yeah.
feel like that's going to be amount? I mean, my feeling is that it's just systemic pesticide,
Right.
and with all of our pollinators, including butterflies and all that.
So this is colony collapse disorder. Has everyone here heard of that before? Yeah. Colony collapse disorder. So we've basically got bees, colonies that are dying, right? It's honeybees, which is affecting our honey industry, but it's also the wild bee populations that pollinate our crops. And so pollination-based agriculture is kind of a big deal, and we have half the bees that we did just a few years ago. And if we lose the other half, we're in big trouble. The leading perspective on colony collapse disorder, most people I trust believe that it's being caused by neonicotinoid pesticides, which is a particular class of pesticides which is now being banned in Europe, not here. It may be, I figure it will be before long. Obama has called for a task force to study this. I hope they aren't just all bought off by the chemical industry. The reality is we've got to do something, and we may have to do something before we are 100% sure, because by the time we're 100% sure, it could be too late the way this is going. Neonicotinoid pesticides, it's not the same as GMO agriculture, but they're highly connected, and here's how. There are a lot more neonics used in GMO agriculture. So it is very connected in that way. It's just the way that a lot of the pest-resistant crops that have the Bt toxin in them, they actually coat those seeds in neonics right at planting. Because the pesticide resistance takes a little while to take effect to be fully mature in the plant as it's growing. And when it's a baby, it's not bug resistant. And so the neonics see it through for that little period of time, I guess you could say. And then we have this link to monarch butterflies as well as bees potentially being killed by these substances. We have also massive die-off in monarch butterflies, and they also are a significant pollinator, by the way. So this is a real concern, and I have been eating more honey from local bee farmers because I just think that local honey, not the big commercial stuff, but local honey, I think we want to support them and make it more of an industry to have hives because we really need our bees big time. Yeah. You mean harvesting their own honey, like having their own hives? It's a lot of work, actually. I looked into it, and it's like a few hours a week to have a hive. So, you can decide if it fits into your lifestyle and context. I don't think everyone needs to do that. We'd be overwhelmed with honey. But sure, it can be a positive step. Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. It is. It is. Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the reasons why biodiversity is so important. Why nature is always biodiverse. You know, every ecosystem has lots of different things that all play together. And when we kind of, when we pave it all, when we put it all into ways that, make it easy for our tractors to go through it, we do create a danger. Particularly when, we obliterate most of the diversity of crop options in the world. And Monsanto would like to control the world's food supply. They'd like, if possible, to be controlling all the seeds. And that's a very frightening prospect. Because from their business model, if there's a 9 in 10 chance that they make trillions, and a 1 in 10 chance that they obliterate all life on Earth, that's worth, business-wise, that's a risk worth taking. So the potential downside of genetically engineering something that has some unexpected result that could be devastating is very real. When you literally create life, you can't put this genie back in the bottle. The GMO life forms that will continually reproduce will outlive nuclear waste. I mean, they're with us as part of the ecosystems of life for eternity. So what happens if at some point one of them does something we didn't expect? This is why we sometimes call it frankenfood, right? And it could do something we don't expect to our bodies, or it could do something we don't expect to the planet. And the FDA hasn't done any actual testing of its own, and it's just taking the word of the companies that manufacture this stuff, we got a problem. Yeah.
I know you had a question over there, but I wanted to switch to radiation.
Mm-hmm.
Fukushima and the fish that are in our ocean, and if you are aware of, I have heard that there's been radiated butterflies that have been mutated by the radiation. Talk to me about it.
Well, to be honest, I think what's happening in Fukushima is obviously is a vast disaster. I think that in Japan, people are being lied to about the level of toxicity, and we are here too, and there's not enough testing. I have not seen any data that's led me to think that we have a seriously, dangerously contaminated food supply on the west coast of the United States. Nor that our fish, I have yet to hear of any fish being tested, and of course a lot isn't tested. But if we heard even spotty results of tests that were showing dangerous levels of radiation, that would be a significant piece of data. I haven't heard that. There's a lot of alarm and a lot of fear around this, and I have every time I've looked into it, I've thought, because I don't come from an attitude of trusting the authorities and everything, right? But whenever I've looked into it, I have not seen the data that's made me feel alarmist about our food supply right now from Fukushima. I have a concern that a major earthquake over there at any point in the next 30 years could cause massive radiation outflowing that could be truly devastating to perhaps even all life on Earth. That's the biggest fear I have with Fukushima, because it's going to take them decades, the way they're going, to have it actually contained in any more serious way. But as far as, and what's happening now is clearly this continuous flow of radiation that I feel terrible about that going into the oceans and ecosystems. The Pacific Ocean, however, is pretty big, and the dilution that happens is pretty immense. So that's my honest take on it.
That's full of questions there, but then there's talk about desalination from ocean water, which has been radiated.
So I know that we had a desalination plant in Santa Cruz proposed and it was voted down. And honestly, I haven't researched that. What is the realities of that? What is the health impact of that? What is the energy consumption of that? Why did voters vote it down when we have a water crisis? Obviously, there were good reasons. So, and maybe there are some folks in this room who are more informed about that. But because it's not an issue that's actually up right now, I haven't been looking into it recently. Yeah.
I was going to ask about seed libraries and how are we utilizing that? Is that something like a plan for post-GMO world?
Seed libraries? Well, I mean, first I'll say there are some folks who are working very hard to preserve heirloom varieties, and I honor them deeply for that. You know, there are farmers and farms that are growing heirloom varieties that may be lower yield and lower profit margin, but they're wanting to preserve traditional foods. And, you know, we may, in time, look back on them as some of the real heroes of the human race. As far as, I'm not sure what else you're referring to in terms of libraries. I'm not aware of. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what specifically you're referring to. It's not like you can check out a book, check out a seed, but you know, obviously there are efforts to preserve and you have to keep them growing, right? You can't just keep a seed on a shelf forever. So you got to keep it cycling. And do we have till 6:30, by the way? Okay, we'll take one more question and then I'll move towards closing. Yeah. Great question. So statistically, first off, I'll say that statistically organic food has about a 20% lower yield than conventional agriculture per acre. That's the data that's generally put out there. However, it's a lot more resilient. And there are major strides being made in organic agriculture. It hasn't just stayed static for the last 100 years. And we are learning about how to do it in ways that are incredibly effective. And with crop rotation, long term, it can actually outpace commercial agriculture because the soil gets healthier and healthier. And when it's done right, yields increase. And particularly in times of climate distress, organic agriculture can actually outperform. Because richer soil that has more life and vitality and nutrients in it, the roots go deeper, they're stronger, they get more out of it, and the water is held better. The moisture is held. You get less floods and you get less drought impact. And in a world of climate change, that actually matters and matters a great deal. Much of the world's food is actually grown, 70% of it is actually grown small-scale style family farms. Only 30% is this big corporate agribusiness model. So although we're told we have to have this to feed the world, and it is the dominant norm in this country, you know, we can obviously do a lot better when we look at a bigger picture. And I will add that majority of our corn and soybeans in the United States, which are the two main crops we grow in this country, are fed to livestock or are being used for ethanol, which we're feeding to our cars. So if we were to shift our agricultural policies to have less factory farms and more efficient cars, we could dramatically increase the cropland we have available, which would enable us to move in an organic direction and grow more foods for people. And that's ultimately what we're calling for. Yeah. Well, the average American family of 4 wastes $2,000 a year on food that goes wasted. And that's not even counting what restaurants are wasting or what stores are wasting. This whole supply chain is full of waste. And that is one of the values of more local food because you can have more of a relationship. I love community-supported agriculture. You know, we have so many opportunities for that right here in our community. And every week you get another batch of stuff and you're in relationship with the farm. And it's actually the best value, you know, because you're in relationship with what's actually available. And there's a lot less waste in that because the farm's going to make sure that everything they grow gets distributed, right? And there's no waste in the stores or stuff that they can't sell to stores and all of that. So So CSAs are a beautiful way to help, if you eat the food. If you just put it in your fridge and then compost it at the end of the week, that's not so good. So we make it a real challenge, and our boys are very involved in this. Every week we look at our CSA and we look at what we got, and some of the stuff, to be honest, I wouldn't have chosen to purchase. I'm not a big fan of celery root, for example. But we get it every week, so we're finding interesting things to do with it. But it's fun, to be introduced to new things. I had a green the other day. I was like, what is this? Something you eat raw or you cook? Well, let's find out. So, biodiversity is an awesome thing. And, in terms of the food movement, I love biodiversity. We need so many different approaches. We need to reform big corporate agribusiness. We need to reform corporate America and the mass food industry. We also need to empower the natural brands. We also need to get away from brands altogether, We need people in their homes being everyday revolutionaries. And we need people out in the streets organizing at the ballot box. And we need people who are holding companies accountable. And we need people who are bringing more love, and more gratitude and joy into food. We need educators. We need people talking to their family and community. We need spokespeople. We need integrity. And it all helps, right? It's all part of something. Every time you eat food that is an act of love for your body and in integrity with your values, you're taking a stand. You are part of a revolution. And when you're part of that revolution, you are literally increasing the chances that you're going to have a long and healthy life. You are literally increasing the chances that this world will have a better chance of surviving and thriving into future generations. So what we do with food matters. It matters a lot. And I want to close with a quote from George Bernard Shaw, who said, "This is the true joy in life, to be used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. To be a force of nature instead of a feverish clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy." He said, "I'm a member of the community, and as a member, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can before I die. Life is no brief candle to me. It's more of a splendid torch, which I want to burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." So I want to thank you for burning your candle and burning your torch and all the ways that you stand and love and eat and work for your own health and for the world that you want. And I want to thank you for joining in this time, in this event, in this incredible gift to the Santa Cruz community, and standing up for what's possible for you and for your world. It's been a joy to share this time with you.